Joined now by Mike LaTulip, formerly a player at Illinois and Wright State. As you can see, if you're watching on YouTube right now, the jersey's in the background. And Mike, how you and I have gotten to know each other through the field of 68, a analyst now and a host of the After Dark show for the field of 68. So, Mike, it's great to talk to you. And for those of you that are listening to this in audio form, you will have just heard Mike's clip back from New Year's Day talking about Xavier being an NCAA tournament team in his eyes at that point. And Mike, you texted me after the Creighton game the other day on Saturday, just talking about how much you watched Xavier and maybe pulled for Xavier after that take. And I wanted to bring you on here now that Xavier has won 6 in a row. And I know that some of those wins have been against the bottom of the Big East, but they have also been able, to beat Creighton in there in the conference season. They have wins over UConn and Marquette. They were up 16 against St. John's before they didn't finish it off. Still an ability for this team to play against the top of the competition. And I tweeted yesterday, as you all are listening to this, that since February 10th, Xavier is playing as the number 10 team in the country by Bart Torvik. So things are clicking at the right time, Mike. I'm going to turn it over to you for just your thoughts on what you've seen out of this Xavier team lately, what's gone right, and why they've been able to play so well.
Yeah, I think there were things that popped early in the season that led me to say what I said about this team. I mean, not to kind of rehash the clip that you had already ran, but just the lineup optionality, the backcourt, all the different guys they can throw at you, the way that the pieces fit when you just go on down the line between I mentioned the guards, but even just on the wing with Swain and how versatile he is, how impactful he's been defensively. And so there was a lot to like there to begin with. And then, I stuck my neck out there and it was like, when's Fremantle going to come back? And then he comes back and you lose the game to Georgetown. So I'm sure for Xavier fans, it was like, well, now we got Fremantle back and it's still not clicking the way we thought it would. But this is just what happens with new teams. And there are a lot of new guys that came in this year. I mean, a number of new guys that play, pretty high usage roles. And it's not just, hey, get our guy back and we're going to be reacclimated. There's another whole process to that, trying to kind of hit your stride. But the things that I bank on and things that I always bet on, not literally, but when you look at a team and when you, like I did, stick my neck out for Xavier, it's, how consistently hard do you play? Are you about the right things? Do you have a really good coach? Do you have guys that are skilled that can overcome, like Xavier has, just I think a lack of size, right? They've done it with their versatility and their skill more than they have just with sheer size. So like all those things are things that I look at and think to myself, okay, this is a team that I kind of want to latch onto a little bit. And that's top down from Sean Miller all the way down to the guys that they got here. I think I'm not surprised to see them hit this stride. And you talked about the winning streak that they're on. Taking care of business against the bottom of the league at this point in the season is everything. They've had their backs up against the walls to get into the tournament or at least feel comfortable being on the right side of the bubble. And that's all the more impressive to do it like this down the stretch.
So now a Providence game this weekend against a Providence team that just lost to DePaul. Things have kind of unraveled for the Friars here lately, and Xavier needs to be able to finish this season on a high note, the regular season, with a 7th game in that winning streak. Mike, looking at the bench of this team of John Hughley and Jerome Hunter and Dante Maddox, especially what Dante Maddox has been able to do lately. John Hughley has given Xavier some great minutes against Creighton, and then even Butler the other night. Jerome Hunter has really found his footing. He had 9 points against Butler. When you look at the starting group of Xavier, you see a lot of things that stand out, but now the bench has started to evolve too, and it feels like it's taken some of that pressure off the starters.
It for sure has. And I think, it's been cool to see with Conwell specifically in nights that he's maybe not as aggressive or off, to have those combustible nights that Dante Maddox has, like we've seen. I mean, it's not, look, I know he had 2 points against Butler, and it's with those bench guys, it's not going to be every single night where you're putting up 20 a game. But the fact that you have a guy like him that when he goes off and when he really stretches the defense and knocks down shots, like he can be a guy on any night that can score 25 points. And there's not a lot of teams in America that can say that about their bench guys. And then with Jerome Hunter too, I love the way that they can sprinkle him in there, and you can go with the 4 quote unquote guards and wings and just, put Fremantle at the 5, but you can also have Fremantle and Hunter play together. And I thought they've done a good job at times this year, playing almost like with those tandem bigs and looking for each other. You see, Hunter flash to the top of the key and find a ceiling Fremantle. Hunter's really good at kind of lurking in that short corner dunker spot to try to get offensive rebounds. This isn't, and this is probably a separate tangent that I can go on about the offensive rebounding, because
go ahead.
There's a distinction I want to make here about this, because when this is what people do in March, they go in, they look at Ken Palm, they look at analytics, they look at metrics, and they look and they see, well, you're not a good offensive rebounding team, and you're 300 plus in America in offensive rebounding. But why is that? And when you actually watch Xavier, it's why Sean Miller is a damn good coach, is because they're sending 3, sometimes 4 guys back in transition defense when the shot goes up. So they're saying, that's fine. We will concede. We'll let Fremantle battle down there. He got 4 offensive rebounds in their last game, but we'll concede the offensive rebounding if it means we can set our defense and get our matchups defensively, which allows us to not have to foul because we're not matched up with our proper assignments. It allows us to be in gaps, to be able to help the way we want to help, to create turnovers like we have. So even though you're not getting possessions back on the offensive glass, you're getting them back on the defensive end, a defense that since I think February 1st is a top 20 in America. So that's why, that's why I like this team so much. It's, not just because of the pieces, it's because Sean Miller and that staff understands that and is able to pull those different levers to give this team, a chance to be successful. We see other teams in America, they're like, just send 5 to the glass and figure out later. This, I think, plays to the strengths of this team.
Now at this point, Mike, you just have to get into the tournament, right? You've done all of this work in February. You have one more game remaining in the regular season. Then you go to the Big East tournament. I mean, this team right now is absolutely playing like a team that could win the Big East tournament next week. There's no doubt in my mind that, playing against, assuming Seton Hall loses to UConn on Saturday afternoon, it'll be Xavier and Marquette at 2:30 on Thursday afternoon at the Big East quarterfinals. Xavier almost beat Marquette at Cintas when Ryan Conwell didn't get called for the trip at the very end of that game, and then they did win on the road once Fremantle was back at Marquette. So I think that Marquette matchup is one a lot of Xavier fans would probably think is favorable. And then from there, you just let the pieces fall where they may. I'm curious, Mike, looking at how well Xavier has played lately, having the second most experienced team in the country, it took a while to click, but just maybe, looking at Xavier from the perspective of the entire country and the transfer portal and everything else, it took a while, right? It took a while for Dante Maddox to find himself. We're seeing John Hughley play better. Jerome Hunter's obviously coming off everything injury-wise that he came off over the last year. But now you're starting to see the pieces gel. It took a while and a lot longer than this coaching staff would have thought, but they have gelled. Are you seeing this more and more just throughout the sport?
I am, and especially with the older teams, when you have guys that have kind of been through battles and been through wars, it's always going to be a process allocating roles, allocating minutes. For a guy like Dante Maddox, with the usage that he had at Toledo last year, to come in and say, okay, where do I fit into this off the bench? What are my looks going to be like? And I've always said that confidence, not only just individually, but as a collective unit, comes from predictability and roles. And so getting Fremantle back and having those roles be more defined and guys growing confidence within those roles just gives you the best chance to win. And you talked about, there's a fearlessness to this team. And when you go into the Big East tournament, I mean, who could you put in front of them that they're not like, we can beat these guys? I mean, they've done it to 2 of the top dogs. I mean, St. John's, you obviously got pretty much ran out of the building and at home, but I thought it was a heck of a fight in Madison Square Garden, to a game you probably should have won, to be honest. I know St. John's is, have mounted some comebacks this year, but a game that goes into OT, I mean, like, you should have all the confidence in the world going into the Big East tournament. Have to take care of business, keep doing what you've been doing. You can't afford a loss to Providence. I mean, I think a loss to Providence doesn't shatter your tourney hopes, but Selection Sunday is more about, not completely putting it in the hands of the committee. I mean, we saw last year, Boise State, they panned the camera to Leon Rice and his son. They were sitting there, and the way they announced the teams that got in, Boise State realized they were the last team to get in. And, I think Leon Rice's son looked at him and was like, you could read his lips. He's like, we were the last team. So like they didn't even see that coming. So you don't want to leave any doubt. Take care of business against Providence and then go and have a great showing in the Big East tournament so that you can like really enjoy Selection Sunday and let everyone else on the bubble, deal with the carnage, right? Like that's part of the control your own destiny element to the Xavier team. And I tie it all back to the experience like you talked about and the role definition, because there are teams that are still searching for that. Like we try to expedite it in this 31 to 35 game season when like most teams that are younger, they may not hit that stride until the 45th game. The issue is that you don't usually get to a 45th game, especially in this day and age, because guys transfer out. So now you got a team, because they're older and because they understand each other, they've been able to find that, I think, quicker than some other teams, and they're finding it at the right time.
Looking around the rest of the country, outside of Xavier in this local bubble here, looking around the rest of the country, this is the final weekend of the regular season, Mike, and you cover the whole sport. I'm curious what your thoughts are of some storylines, some headlines that maybe people that listen to this show every day, and follow these teams so closely might not realize or might not know, or just things that in general people should be looking forward to over the next 3 days.
I think it's going to be a march for the ages, because we've seen the craziness. There's always craziness in March, but it feels like the last week, 2 weeks has been, even more crazy. The half court shots and we're getting it almost like it feels like early, but I was going through and looking at Duke and Auburn at the top. And I do think they're at the top there. I think Florida's in that conversation too. I think you could put Florida in there in that tier, but Duke and Auburn specifically, I mean, for the people that know KenPom, it's obviously an analytics database. It goes back to, I think, 1997. And when you look at the net rating of these teams at the top, and, Duke and Auburn are obviously the top two in the country right now in net rating. Their net rating, when you look at all the data back to 1997 for these teams, it's two of the top four teams in the database since 1997. Which is crazy. And then you look at it and you're like, okay, well, who's next after that? Houston, I think, is seventh, and in like the history of KenPom with all these teams. So there's a lot of dominance in college basketball, and I'm kind of looking through, and you start to wonder, okay, well, who's going to be the NC State this year? And is that possible? I don't think that's possible this year. I think some of the teams are too good at the top, and the teams that are way outside the bubble and not getting in, I don't see them making that type of run. But it's interesting going across the country, and the bubble is, I think, really strong with like the first few teams, and then you look at like the other teams that are further down the bubble, like some of the ACC teams, I don't think are as strong. So again, that kind of ties back to Xavier as well. Like I think it's not the strongest bubble, but we're in for some craziness this year. I think there's teams that look at the top of the SEC, and Florida's not the first team in the SEC right now, but I think Florida can win a national championship. Maryland isn't the top team in the Big Ten right now, but Maryland can make a Final Four. Like there's plenty of teams across the country, I think, that are going to make a name for themselves here in March, and plenty of players are going to do that as well.
Well, just looking at bracket matrix right now, last updated on March 5th as we record this, but you look at the 8-9 seeds, right? Illinois, BYU, Gonzaga, UConn. The 9 seeds, Creighton, Vandy, New Mexico, and Utah State. So a couple of Mountain West teams mixed in there. But those are some huge names on the 8 line that if I'm a 1 seed and I see Illinois, who can get hot at any point, they shoot 1,000,000 threes a game, and that's always a recipe for success in March if they can,
make them.
As you know, Mike, if they can make them.
Yeah.
BYU, who's playing as one of the best teams in the country over the last month. Gonzaga, whose resume is weird, but their metrics bear out as one of the best teams in the country. And then UConn, the 2-time defending national champs, who now have Liam McNeely back, just beat Marquette, and it looks like they've turned a corner. And oh, by the way, if you're a 1 seed, you might have to play one of them just to get to the Sweet 16.
It's crazy. I mean, honestly, it's what's funny is, a lot of these teams they're on that one line. I mean, I think right now it with Florida's win last night, it feels pretty firmly Auburn, Duke, Houston, and Florida. I think Florida probably bumped Tennessee off that one line, but it's even beyond the 8-9 game too. I think it's so funny as a Big Ten guy, seeing how many of these Big Ten teams are on that 3, 4, 5 line. Like, I think there's like a collision course that's going to happen with the Big Ten and the SEC to either get to an Elite Eight or potentially get to a Sweet 16, like you mentioned. So for all the talk of the SEC this year, what's crazy is I went back and I looked and I said, okay, who are the teams that have gotten all the bids over the years? Like, conferences that get the most bids, because you hear people talk all the time. They're like, we're going to have 4 SEC teams in the Final Four, or we're going to have. It doesn't work like that. It really never has. I mean, all the teams that have had the most bids over the years, I think I looked at it, even just like Elite Eight teams, the last 5 years or so, none of the teams that had the most bids had more than 2 teams go to the Elite Eight, which is just wild. And so SEC, that's on the table for them this year. Like the one conference over the last few years that has taken a dip but has been unbelievable in March is the ACC. And like, I could see it again this year. I could see Duke making a run. I could see Clemson, who's not talked about at all and is one of the oldest teams in America. I could see them making it back to an Elite Eight or a Final Four. And then look at what Louisville's done too. So it's going to be fascinating, because it does not, just because you have the most bids does not mean that you are just, going to cakewalk to a Final Four with 3 or 4 of your teams. It's never how it's worked in this tournament. Single elimination, man. That's why it's so crazy.
Mike, I appreciate you taking a few minutes today for the Rebound Rundown. Hopefully at some point we can have you back on, whether it's later this month or maybe next season, depending on how timing works out. This was fantastic. Tell the people here, you're on the Field of 68, but I know you do a lot of other stuff as well. So just tell the people where they can listen to you. Yeah,
Field of 68. I tweet, or I guess I X. I don't know. I post.
You tweet.
I guess. I tweet. Sure. Yeah. I post and I tweet on at LaTulip_Mike. That's where I do a lot of my stuff as well. And there's some Illinois centric stuff too, some film room stuff, and a podcast that I hop on with them too. So if you're interested in Illinois basketball, you can certainly pop over to that. But certainly Field of 68 after dark. That's been such a blast this year, as I'm sure you can attest to as well. Just a great group of guys and guys that love the game. So I'd suggest for sure, in addition to the Rebound Rundown, tune into Field 68 as well.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate it. Have a great day.
Yeah, appreciate it, man.